welcome back to Remotely Speaking Up. On this episode, we are joined by Janice Sutherland, Leadership Development Expert Extraordinaire. This episode, we're focusing on discrimination within the remote working space. Now, Jan, welcome to our show. And we're really happy to have you here because you're quite an expert in this area and also an expert in, for the past few years, it's been your experience working remotely. And you also have experience across different borders. So thank you so much. And over to you. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Rochelle. Thank you so much. Delighted to join you this afternoon. So first of all, don't let your accent, my accent fool you. I'm British born, but I have lived in the Caribbean for the past 10 years. And that was by choice. By choice, my husband and I decided to leave the UK and move out to Antigua. And when I originally came out here, I was working for a large telecoms organization, worked my way up to being their first female CEO, and then took the decision to move into entrepreneurship at an age when probably some people may be looking at retirement. So without giving away my age too much, I look good. Without giving away my age too much.
We can agree on that.
I was in another transition later in life. So I became, I'm an executive coach, leadership development expert, working with organizations globally, coaching their leaders, female leaders, about how to navigate this space of being a leader. Mm-hmm. And the discrimination question was a really good question because I hadn't really thought about it. Mm. I'd faced discrimination, I suppose, face to face, living in the UK, growing up in the UK, working and navigating that. So I understood that. And then coming to the Caribbean, you meet a different type of discrimination, maybe on so many different levels. Yeah. There's still the female discrimination, gender discrimination, because you're a woman, and this can be a predominantly patriarchal society. So being the first woman to head up a particular sector, the comments I got was, well, oh, you're a woman, you're going to be easier to deal with. And I'm like, well, I didn't get where I was today by being easy. Yeah. So that was my kind of response. And then you have, when I come into the entrepreneurial space now, my accent, dare I say, opens many doors for me, because people assume they're speaking to a particular type of person. Maybe that person's Caucasian. If it's not Caucasian, they speak to someone English. And if I'm the Caribbean, that means foreign. I'm going to use that, the vernacular. Foreign is better. Yeah. So in that perspective, it does open doors for me. And in the remote space, how do I handle it? I kind of lean into it sometimes. I'll admit it. It's a foot in the door. It doesn't detract from the qualifications and the expertise I have. But when you bring it back to my home market, sometimes I get, because again, it's not so much reverse discrimination, but you're local. So that means we shouldn't have to pay for you. Yet again, my expertise it doesn't matter where it came from. It's an expertise you should be paying for. So I kind of think it works in different nuances. Yeah. I've not had to deal with the colorism discrimination per se. I've never really had to come across that, though I hear it happen. You see it, it happens, you know it happens, but I haven't had to deal with that. I think my accent sometimes, or how I communicate, kind of gets my foot in the door, and then people do the research, like, oh, she's black, oh, she's this, so it does have to have different nuances, but I really don't let it get in the way. The bottom line is, you need an expertise, you need the knowledge I have, I am worth it, you're going to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing is sometimes it does get frustrating, the fact that in 2020 we're still discussing these issues, and the fact that in 2020 someone can still know about your expertise and what you do, and then their comment be, you're black. Like, what does that have to do with anything you bring to the table? So it is definitely frustrating. One of the reasons why this topic came up for me was when I was doing the research on digital nomads, I wasn't looking for this topic at all. I was quite
Yeah.
surprised that it kept coming out as an issue to the digital nomads that I spoke to, particularly the
Wow.
female digital nomads.
Okay.
I spoke to someone from Jamaica, and she said before she started consulting internationally, she was very sure that it was her expertise that people were deferring to her on. But as soon
Yeah.
as she started working more internationally, she started to pick up that the way in which they interacted with her within meetings, her colleagues, that gender was an issue and race was becoming
Yeah.
an issue. And I've heard
Yeah.
that over and over again from people that I've spoken to.
And I think it's maybe it's race, but it's also perception, because if people, you know, we're talking digital space, and sometimes we don't even get onto video calls. And if we're doing video, if we're doing it, we're doing it without the photo, without pictures.
Yeah.
So people make assumptions based on what they hear.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, and so if you're Jamaican, it must be this. If you're English, you must be that. So there's all those assumptions where, you know, strip it out, and what are you actually having this conversation about? You're having this conversation about because you have a need for my expertise.
Yeah.
And that really should be the focus. I appreciate it's not always that way.
Yeah.
From a woman perspective, I've just done a whole thing quite recently about confidence and having that confidence and owning who you are. And I know it can be it can be challenging because again, in some of the spaces, especially the tech space, it's very male dominated. So, you know, they're looking at you going, well, what do you know? You're a woman. What do you know? So it's a case of actually owning who you are and being confident in that, and not letting whatever voices in your head telling you that, you know, this is what they think. Just deal with the subject matter in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And how big do you see this, or how significant would you say this is as a problem in the remote working space? Because as I said, it's quite, I know this, I've faced discrimination myself. I know discrimination exists, but I never quite thought about it within the context of the remote working space until I did that research. So how big of a problem?
You know, maybe I'm a little bit of a misnomer, because I always had the attitude, even in real life, the attitude that I am the best person for the job. So I don't allow you to discount me based on discrimination on your thoughts. I put my best foot forward. That's not to say I may not have lost work because of people's perceptions or biases. It's just the fact that I go in there, and you know, sometimes we also have to check ourselves sometimes as well. You know, especially if we're going into new spaces, we're going in to meet new organizations. There are sometimes we can put our own biases in our own head as what they think is going to happen based on maybe past experiences. So for me, I always treat this as a new slate. And every time I go to a new client, and if you decide I'm not the one you want to work with, you bet your bottom line on bottom dollar I'm going to find out why. So at least if there's an issue what I presented, I can correct that next time. And if it's something you don't want, to share with me, well, fair enough. You've made that decision. I'm not going to let it bother me. Walk on. If you don't want me, somebody else will. And I have that attitude all the way through. And I think there's almost a attitudinal thing. I'm not saying that we have to discount it happening. I'm not saying we have to accept it happening. We have to accept that it's happening, but be cognizant that it could. And how will you deal with it? Because you can allow it to kind of bring you down and think, oh, wow, that's because of this one. So you can say, well, actually do one. I won't do the finger gestures here. You can do one, and I'll move on to somebody else who actually sees the value in what I bring to the table.
Absolutely. I agree with that. fingers and all.
I know, and I'm really holding it in here.
Totally right now. I love it. Fingers and all, I agree with that. But yeah, you mentioned earlier the issue of colorism, and I know that particularly is a big one, because within the digital world, you can present yourself in a certain way, as you said, so people meet you, and then at least some people feel that they've already had the chance to put forward what they can do. And then after the client meets them and see who they are, they're already invested, or they're already committed, so they go ahead anyway. But I've heard people saying before, I have a friend that she would always say, oh, if we're going to do this task, we're going to put you forward for it, because they're not going to speak to someone that looks like me. I've heard that. I found that And it's like what you said in terms of because it exists, people give into it.
Yeah,
They don't even try. They just kind of accept, okay, this is how it is. Where I totally agree with you that you push forward anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've not had that happen in the digital space, but I have had it happen in real life, and I had it happen because when I was in the telecom sector, and most of my bosses were white males, and we have a black audience, you know, so sometimes I've been put forward as the face, the figurehead, because you look like them.
Yeah.
You know, from that respect, and that's made me quite giggle because I'm like, well, come on, you know, but you're the one in charge. Yeah, but they're not going to listen to me because, you know, this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
So you sort of, I've experienced it in real life, but not so much in the digital space. And to be honest, I work independently.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you want to meet my team, it's me.
Yeah.
You know, this is it, chief cook and bottle washer. So, you know, this is what you're going to get.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
deal with it.
So what would you suggest? Because I think you already made some really good suggestions in terms of mindset and attitude. So that's from a very individual perspective in terms of what can the person do that's experiencing that,
Yes.
how they can reply. What would you say to companies that are engaging digital nomads or remote workers and who might have these biases? But these are also we know there are problems also within the physical space. So what would you say?
It's exactly, I mean, it's great that this is now coming up. I think we had a prior conversation about the changes and the experience of racism, and I've been around a lot longer to experience it more in the 70s and stuff like that. But the same way you would deal with these issues, well, I'm assuming you, as an organization, you deal with race and gender issues in the workplace, in the physical workspace, is exactly the same way you need to deal it in the digital space. It's no different. It's just the fact that these people that you're dealing with are in a different office, a different country, a different city. There should be it should be a zero tolerance.
Yeah.
Absolutely zero tolerance. And don't think that from organizations that this is the only company I can work with, because there are a lot more out there, a lot more available. Get off your backside, organization. Don't be lazy and do your research.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
so that's what I would tell them to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think sometimes my frustration with how discrimination and diversity and inclusion is tackled in organizations is when you lump all the issues together. So by lumping all the issues together, you say gender discrimination, marital status, age, race, and so forth. By lumping them all together, you don't fully address let's say the ramifications and impact of each. So I think that's a real issue, especially in the current climate, that needs to be dealt with. I can tell you an experience I had within the digital space where I was in a group. I was in a digital nomad group, and that group was part of a co-working space. We all met through a co-working space.
Right.
And there were a lot of inappropriate jokes being made by the people using the space in the group. So there were a long sort of kind of very short of male banter, but very sexual. But then on top of that, there was a comment that was made where they were suggesting, let's play this game. And this game was an inappropriate game. It was a board game, but it was based around trade, during the colonial times.
Oh,
so you were pretending
good grief.
Good
grief.
Madness.
No way.
So when they put that forward and they started making jokes around slavery, I said, what the F? I am out, carry on smartly. But then apparently that caused a massive ruckus within the group. My friends who left the group after I did, started sending me screenshots of what was said after. And you wouldn't believe a group of well-traveled people, the really derogatory comments that followed. But the owner approached me about it. He said he wanted to understand why I was offended. And I explained it. And he was saying, okay, he's working on this and he's trying to see what he can do about it. So one of the things I suggested to him was, well, why don't you have an equality or a race or a values charter on your website to say the behavior that you expect from people that use the space?
Yeah.
And his response was, he doesn't want to do that. That's too in your face for people. So
you've got to get it in your face.
yeah,
You've
you
got
have
to
to.
get, you know, the people on the other end were in your face making the comments.
Yeah,
So why is this any different?
yeah.
I would, if that was a male person, grow some,
Yeah,
grow some,
yeah,
and you know, sometimes it's easier said than done. But put yourself in that situation. If you're the company, you're the organization, the owner, put yourself in that situation. And I'm sure there's situations you've been in, unless you're, you know, white. I lose all the term, but you know, if it hasn't happened to you, then you're very lucky. But put yourself in that person's shoes as to how they would feel. And I would have to, as an owner, question myself as to why I feel uncomfortable, because that's what it is. It's a discomfort
yeah,
about addressing. That tells me that you too have a biases.
yeah.
If he has to ask you why you felt the way you did,
Exactly.
that tells me that you don't understand. You don't get it. You don't
Yeah.
get it. And if you then question the fact why you have to put on this charter again, is this an organization I want to work with? Really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was very surprising because it was quite. This is an international space. You're working with international people on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And you haven't thought about this. So what ended up happening is that, and what happens in a lot of companies is that leaders try to firefight the issues as they arise, as opposed to saying from the very beginning, well, this is what we stand for. We are no tolerance in this.
Yeah.
And furthermore, this is what we believe.
As a leader, you set the culture from the top. You set that. And I'm speaking from my own leadership perspective. And when I was in that position, that, you know, there's certain things you won't tolerate it, and you have to stand by it, no matter how uncomfortable it is. It's not about you.
Yeah.
Leadership isn't about you. It's about the people you lead.
Yeah.
So again, I'm just going to say it's a man, grow some. And step up and do the job you're employed to do. You know, I'm very passionate about this, you know, so
I can see
very passionate about this.
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties, or one of the things it highlighted for me as well, was the new situations that are created by increased working and the digital nomad culture as well. Because one of the issues he was having was that the same people that he was trying to chastise, they didn't work for him. They were his customers. They were using his space. They're his customers. I still agree that even for customers, he needs to put something in place. But he was straddling this line of, these are his customers, but these are also people that he's responsible for, let's say, managing them as they use the space. So then there's that customer versus, not quite, they weren't his employees, but in a way they adhered to him. So I think that was the fine line that he found himself trying to, and he didn't think about it. I don't think he really thought of it until issues started coming up.
And you know, and I think that, you know, this has to be a conversation that's very, very open about, you know, as an owner or as a leader of this particular types of spaces, what do you stand for? Do you take it further down the line and start saying, well, we don't want women with children, you know, because, you know, I could easily have a whole brood of children in the background, but I'm doing my work. What you're paying me for is what I deliver, not the color of my skin, not where I live, not what I stand for, to a degree, but you know, you're paying for my expertise, not what I look like, or my gender. That's what you're paying for. So, you know, position yourself right and do the job you're there to do. Be a leader. And I appreciate you have to follow it, but you have to stand for something. Can you say what they say? You have to stand for something, or you stand for nothing. You know, and that rings very true.
I think he found himself in a very difficult position, and it just really made me think of how with the rise of co-working spaces and the rise of these sort of incubation spots and remote working, and you have different persons traveling the globe and ended up in a similar space. That's an issue that I don't think these spaces have had to really or have thought of even having to manage. Because I don't think they would have gotten into it with an, let's say, an HR perspective or an HR lens,
No,
thinking about the issue.
definitely. I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Yeah, so I totally agree. What advice would you give to remote workers in this space? Because like yourself, you mentioned in terms of the mindset and in responding, let's say
Yeah.
someone isn't, or well, hopefully they can build to your level of confidence. But what else?
Hey, this is always a work in progress. Trust me.
Oh,
And I've probably reached a stage in life where I don't give a damn. You know, so
yeah,
and I'm fortunate there, but I appreciate there are much younger workers or
yeah,
people new to the space who don't have that level of confidence. The first thing I would say to them is if they're working for an organization,
mm-hmm.
um, you know, as a contractor, is find out what their policies are. Find out what the policies are about protecting remote workers. What are the terms of engagement that needs to that needs to happen? What are the reporting lines if you come across an incident or an issue? It doesn't. It's something you're uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be about gender or discrimination.
Yeah.
Just something you're uncomfortable with. Who is it you're supposed to take this up the line? What are the lines? And whether remote workers or not, they should still pretty much have the same rights as if as a worker that was in a physical space.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there should be very little demarcation around that. You just happen to be providing a service where you are situated somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I've managed virtual teams, I've managed remote teams in different offices, you know, and the terms still go the same. So be clear on what the ground rules or the terms of engagement are when you engage with these organizations. Use all the tools that are available to you if you have an issue.
Yeah.
Do not hold it in. Don't be afraid to speak up. They are there for a reason. The fact that maybe they've never exercised them before is not your problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's somebody maybe not had the guts to actually address the situation in the past.
Yeah.
And if it's not you this time, it could be somebody else. If you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for the people coming up behind you.
Yeah.
So those are probably my key tips, apart from the confidence bit.
Yeah. No, I agree totally. I came across a situation as well. It's so interesting when you speak to people within this space and you just go, wow, you faced that issue. But I came across one of the ladies I spoke to. She actually left the company, but then she actually sued the company as well.
Wow.
And the funny thing about her situation, funny not being laugh funny, but the odd thing was that she was brought into that space to work for them to reduce their issues of discrimination.
Oh, goodness sake.
So, and what she found instead was that constantly it was about her gender. Constantly it was about the fact that she was a younger person as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And she faced sexual harassment in the remote working space as well, you know? So all of these things came and she came to a point where she complained, and because she complained, they fired her. But you were very much right in terms of the terms and conditions, because where me and her got to talking was she was asking me about what she could do. I said, did you have a contract or did you negotiate terms and conditions? And she didn't.
Yeah.
So you're very much right. I think from the very get-go, that needs to be done. And I think the remote worker needs to realize that they have the power to also negotiate.
Yeah. And I think organizations, as we evolve in this new space, as more and more organizations have people working from home, working remotely, you know, having almost an employee handbook or contract or remote workers handbook would go a long way to address that. Like you said, I don't think it's things some organizations have to think about before, because it's never been an issue. You know, I've dealt with a number of companies in the Caribbean who've really struggled with having people working remotely, because traditionally they were so used to knowing that if someone is in their chair, that means they're working. Well, we all know they could be playing Candy Crush for hours on end, you know, and I had to say to them, well, actually, you know, what is your challenge with them not working from home? You need to change what you're measuring. It's not about bums in seats all the time you're in the chair. It's about the productivity and the output. Yeah. And your level of trust, because it's a trust issue, you have to check your level of trust. You know? But there are things you can put in place. You can put in daily check-ins. You can have a process whereby people can use you know, online meeting rooms to meet regularly. If you want to check up on what people are doing, there are things you can put in place without being on their neck. stepping on the neck 24/7.
Yeah.
What I'm finding is that more people who are remote working actually work a lot harder and far more productive than people in the office.
Absolutely.
Because they don't have the coffee stops, they don't have the water cooler moments and the chats people passing by. So as an employer, your focus should be on the output and the productivity, and not the time that person spends sitting glued to their laptop.
Yeah, there's definitely a big cultural presentism in the Caribbean. And you mentioned in terms of the fact that discrimination can occur very differently within the Caribbean setting, and is very much related to the history that we came through, that colonialist plantocracy history. And a part of that is within organizations, like today we see still this preference for authoritative leadership. In terms of someone has to be overlooking and seeing what you're doing in order to be doing it. So it's a really interesting dynamic that now they've been suddenly shoved out of.
And the other discrimination that people, again, I think we're starting to see more probably in the Caribbean as well, is age.
Yeah.
We are living a hell of a lot longer than we ever did before. So it's not uncommon for organizations to have 4 or 5 different generations in the business. And then there's the whole communication with the millennial to the baby boomer, to the Gen X, to the Gen Z, whatever, whatever generation it is. And then people believing because I am the most senior in years, that, I should have that job. And it's not a meritocracy. It's not, it doesn't work like that. Yeah. It's not about the fact you've been here the longest, you get the best job. Have you done the best job to get the job? Should be the action, the attitude. And that is a bit of a rude awakening to a lot of organizations. But I've been here whole long, so.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I've seen it as well in other companies. There was a point where a lot of the Japanese traditional firms had to come to this realization that actually we've been promoting for years on the basis of seniority because of that fit with our cultural values, respect for age. But now what we're ending up with is a top-heavy company, and our productivity is going nowhere. A lot of them, survival had to recalibrate very quickly.
Absolutely. And dare I say, and I don't want to be too ageist because I'm up there myself, but the fact is technology is changing so much as well. So there's, there's the whole challenge of actually keeping abreast of the technology to actually lead these people that are digital. It's a whole different skill set all over again. It's a whole different skill set all over again. And as a person who is more mature, you have to be prepared to actually up your skill set to lead these. If you want to stay in that job and we're moving to this digital space, you have to be responsible for upping your skill set to enable you to effectively lead that team. It's not about the team conforming to where you work. It's about you actually adapting your skill set to meet the new ways of working. And that again is another rude awakening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real challenge for a lot of managers because it goes to pushing against the traditional, but it also goes to, I guess, a sense of ego as well, where you've earned this spot through all your years.
And I think the thing from that I learned a lot is that I was and I'm going to use this word, an accidental technologist. Nice. I knew nothing about telecoms when I got into the industry. Nothing, zero. I had a skill set the organization wanted from a commercial aspect, but what I quickly had to learn to do is to take off my ego, thinking I have to know everything, and know who to ask. And when I ask them, if they start using technical terms to me, don't be afraid to ask to dumb it down. This is me you're talking to. Use terminology you understand. And that again, if you're a mature person in this new space, you have to check your ego at the door and learn to know who to ask, and know that the person who's younger than you or who's in this space isn't trying to belittle you. They will help you once you ask. Because they want to have a good experience too.
No, that's gold. I totally agree. And it's hard for some people to do, but I think that's the only way to do it. And I mean, the generations have so much to learn from each other. So I think where you can put your ego aside, you can see that it's not just about you having to go and ask for help, but this person is also, there's a knowledge exchange that's going on there. That's really important.
definitely, definitely.
Yeah, so we've come to just about the end of our episode. But of course, Jan, before you go, you
Oh
have
my
to
God.
share with us your funniest story.
Oh my goodness.
Funniest travel story.
I don't know if I have a funny travel story. Let me think. I've almost missed planes. I love trains. I love trains. So I've taken my husband on a 15-hour Amtrak journey because I wanted to ride Amtrak. So
Wow, he really loves you.
he loves me.
Put that out there.
We went from North Carolina to New Orleans.
Yeah.
On Amtrak, and it's fabulous. I would have my goal is to do, once this dies down, if I ever go to America again right now, but my goal is to go from East Coast to West Coast
that would be
on Amtrak, and I want to be in a sleeper cabin, because I wasn't even in a sleeper cabin when I did it. We were in chairs.
That's just one thing I always wanted to do.
You know,
in Europe.
Yeah, so I probably could, if I think about more, I probably have some funny stories. I've traveled a lot. Met the husband with the kids and stuff like that. There's been times I've been on trains and didn't know the language and didn't know where I was going, and the kids are freaking out because we've landed in a bit of a no man's land, Ghettoville, and I'm like, I don't know where I am right now, and I have to
together.
and my husband and my son's going, hide your chain, mum, we're not supposed to where we're supposed to be. So
oh my word.
So having a little adventurous.
That's good. So what would you say, just as we wrap up now, so just again, for those who are listening, this is Jan Sutherland, leadership development expert, also a remote worker, and she's been talking to us a lot about discrimination within the remote working space. So as we wrap up, Jan, what would you like to be your key takeaways to the audience?
My key takeaway is that have the confidence to face the challenges head on. You know, and I think that's what it, nothing's going to change if we don't become the change.
Yeah.
And if we don't speak up about it. So so have the confidence to face those challenges head on.
Yeah. Brilliant. All right. I totally agree. And I'm sure that's going to help a lot of people who feel that sometimes they don't have the right to say anything, or they don't have the right to negotiate their own terms and these sort of things. So thank you so much for that.
Yes. I was going to say one more thing then about that when you just said that.
And
I was going to say, when you just said about people not having the feeling, have the right to have the terms, is that you actually have to change the mindset there, because you're actually in the driving seat, because no organization employs someone for their organization to fail.
Yeah.
They have seen something in you that they need.
Yeah.
So actually flip the script. You're the one in the driving seat.
Yeah, you have power as well. I totally agree. I'm glad you didn't shut up then. So thanks for that. So thank you so much for joining us, Jan. And thank you for all of our listeners for joining us on another episode of Remotely Speaking Up. So we will see you next week. But we're going to say bye to Jan for now. So thank you again, and take care, everyone. This is Remotely Speaking Up.